The bell above the door of the corner booth diner had a little jingle that was as much a part of my life as the smell of stale coffee and sizzling bacon. For 3 years, that jingle had been the soundtrack to my days. It announced the morning rush, the lonely lunchtimers, and the late-night stragglers. I was Clara, and this little diner was my world. Not the world I'd dreamed of as a kid, of course, but the one I had. It paid my rent, just barely, and kept food on my table. Life had a way of sanding you down. My dreams of being an artist, of painting big, colorful canvases, had been packed away in a dusty closet along with my easel and tubes of oil paint. Now my canvas was a Formica countertop, and my colors were ketchup red and mustard yellow. I wasn't bitter about it, mostly. I was just tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and stays there, a constant, low-grade ache. Most days were the same. A blur of faces, orders, and refilled coffee cups. But some days a face would stick. He first came in on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were slow. He chose the booth in the far corner, the one with the ripped vinyl that someone had tried to fix with gray duct tape. He was an old man with a face like a road map of a hard life. Deep lines were carved around his eyes and mouth.
His hair was
thin and white, and he wore a faded army green jacket, the kind that looked like it had seen more than its fair share of rain and cold nights. I walked over, my order pad in hand. "Morning coffee?" I asked, my standard opening line. He looked up at me, and his eyes, though clouded with age, were a startlingly clear blue. They held a deep, quiet sadness that felt familiar, like an old song you can't quite place. "Just a glass of water, please, miss," he said. His voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You got it?" I said, forcing a smile. I brought him the water.
He held the glass with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He didn't look at a menu.
He just sat there, staring out the window, taking slow, deliberate sips of water. He stayed for nearly an hour. The whole time, he watched other people eat. He watched me deliver a plate of pancakes, dripping with syrup and butter, to the family in the next booth. I saw his eyes follow the fork as the little girl lifted a perfect, syrupy bite to her mouth. His Adam's apple bobbed. He was hungry. Not just peckish, but a deep, gnawing kind of hungry that I recognized because I'd felt it myself a few times in my life. When he left, he pushed the booth back in carefully and gave me a small, polite nod. He left no tip, of course, but I hadn't expected one. He came back on Thursday. Same booth, same faded jacket. This time, the smell of frying onions and beef was thick in the air. I was making my rounds, and I saw him close his eyes and just breathe it in, like it was the finest perfume in the world. "Water again today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He flinched a little, as if I'd startled him from a dream. "Yes. Please. Thank you, miss." I couldn't shake the feeling that I should do something. But what? My boss, Mr. Davies, watched the bottom line like a hawk. He was a man whose heart was a calculator. Every slice of bread, every pat of butter was accounted for. Giving away food wasn't just against the rules. It was a cardinal sin. It was grounds for immediate dismissal. I had rent due next week. I couldn't risk it, so I brought him his water and tried to ignore the hollow look in his eyes. But I couldn't. Every time I passed his booth, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. He wasn't a beggar. He had a pride about him, a quiet dignity in the way he sat so straight, in the way he thanked me for the water. He was just a man who had fallen on hard times. A man who was being slowly erased by the world. He left again, just as quietly as before. I watched him walk down the street, his shoulders a little more stooped than they had been on Tuesday. The rest of the week was a blur of work and worry. The image of the old man's face was stuck in my mind. I thought about him as I ate my own meager dinner of toast and eggs. I had food. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had. The thought shamed me. What kind of person was I that I could watch a man starve and do nothing because I was afraid of losing a job I didn't even like? Saturday came, and with it a biting November wind that rattled the diner's windows. The sky was the color of slate, and it threatened a cold, miserable rain. The diner was busy. The jingle of the bell was almost constant. Around noon I saw him. He was standing outside for a long time, just looking in, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his thin jacket. The wind whipped his white hair around. His face, he looked colder, more worn out than ever. Finally, he pushed the door open and slid into the same corner booth. He looked defeated. The pride I'd seen before was still there, but it was hanging on by a thread. I walked over. My heart was pounding. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic and self-preservation what I was going to do. Coffee? I asked, my voice softer than usual. Yes, please, he whispered, not meeting my eyes. Just a black coffee. Coming right up, I said. I went to the counter and poured him a coffee. My hands were shaking a little, then I walked into the kitchen. Sal, our cook, was a big, grumpy man with a heart of gold. He was flipping burgers and yelling at the dishwasher. Sal, I said, keeping my voice low. That order for booth 7, the double cheeseburger deluxe? I need you to make 2 of them. Sal grunted. Did they order 2? No, I said, my voice barely. A whisper. I messed up. I wrote it down wrong. Just make 2. I'll pay for it out of my tips if I have to. Sal eyed me for a second, his gaze sharp. He glanced out the small window into the dining room, saw the old man in the corner. He didn't say a word. He just turned back to the grill and threw another patty down. A silent act of conspiracy. A few minutes later, 2 plates came up under the heat lamp. A double cheeseburger with a mountain of fries, a side of coleslaw, and a pickle spear. It was a beautiful, glorious, artery-clogging sight. I picked up one of the plates. My breath hitched. This was it. I was crossing a line. I walked out of the kitchen, past the other customers, my focus entirely on the man in the corner. I set the plate down in front of him, next to his coffee. He stared at it. His blue eyes widened. He looked from the plate up to my face, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. I didn't order this, he stammered. I know, I said softly, leaning in a little. The kitchen made an extra by mistake. It was just going to get thrown out. It would be a shame to let it go to waste. Please, eat it. It was a clumsy lie, but it was the only thing I could think of to protect his pride. Tears welled in his eyes. Actual shimmering tears. They traced new paths down the weathered lines of his cheeks. He looked down at the plate again, then back. Up at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a choked sound came out.
He just nodded, a small, jerky movement. I gave him a quick, wobbly smile and walked away before I started crying, too.
I got busy with other tables, but I kept glancing over at him. He ate slowly at first, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then he ate with a quiet, desperate intensity. He didn't leave a single crumb. He cleaned the plate. When he was done,
he sat back, a look of profound relief on his face. He looked
different. The food seemed to have put a little bit of life back into him, a flicker of light in his tired eyes. He finished his coffee, and when I went to clear his plate, he finally spoke. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea. Don't you worry about it, I said, my voice catching. You have a good day, you hear? He nodded, slid out of the booth, and walked to the door. This time, he stood a little straighter. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the diner's heating. It was a feeling of rightness. I had done the right thing. Whatever happened, I had done the right thing, and then it happened. Clara, my office, now. The voice was cold and sharp. It was Mr. Davies. He was standing by the kitchen door, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. The warmth in my chest instantly turned to a ball of ice. I followed him into his tiny, cluttered office. The air smelled of cheap air freshener and disappointment. He closed the door behind us and pointed to a small black and white monitor that showed a live feed from the security cameras. "Explain this," he said, his finger jabbing at the screen. It showed a grainy image of me placing the plate of food in front of the old man. I started, my mind racing for a plausible lie. "Don't bother, Clara," he cut me off. "I heard you in the kitchen with Sal. Messed up the order. Really? You think I'm an idiot?"
He was hungry, Mr. Davies, I said, my voice trembling. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days.
"And is that your problem?" he shot back. "Are you running a soup kitchen or a business?" "That plate cost me $7.50 in food cost. $7.50. Do you know how many cups of coffee I have to sell to make that back?"
He's an old man, he looked like a veteran.
"I don't care if he was the president," Mr. Davies's voice was rising. "The rule is simple. No, free, food. We have a business to run. If I let you do it, then Sal starts doing it then. Janine starts doing it. And before you know it, we're bankrupt. I can't have employees who can't follow simple rules." "But it was the right thing to do," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "It was a human thing to do." "The human thing to do is to do the job you're paid for," he said, his face hard and unforgiving. "Pack up your things, Clara. You're fired. I'll have your final paycheck ready on Monday." The words hit me like a physical blow. Fired, just like that. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I stared at him, speechless. All I could think about was my rent. My empty cupboards. The gnawing fear that was always lurking just beneath the surface of my life was now roaring in my ears. "Please, Mr. Davies," I whispered, "I need this job." "You should have thought of that before you decided to start your own personal charity," he said, turning his back on me and starting to shuffle papers on his desk. A clear dismissal. Tears streamed down my face now, hot and angry. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of the office. The diner was still busy, but it all seemed to be happening in slow motion, muffled as if I were underwater. A few of the regulars looked at me with concern. Sal peeked out from the kitchen, his face full of regret. I just shook my head and walked to the small locker in the back where I kept my purse and my coat. I pulled on my thin coat, my hands fumbling with the buttons. Fired for feeding a hungry man. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow. The warmth I'd felt just minutes before was gone, replaced by a cold, hollowing despair. I walked out the front door, the little bell mocking me with its cheerful jingle. The cold wind hit me, and I pulled my coat tighter, but the chill wasn't just on the outside anymore. It was deep inside me. I didn't know where to go, so I just started walking home, my future a terrifying blank slate. The weekend was a long gray blur of anxiety. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the walls, the silence pressing in on me. I counted the money in my wallet. $43. Not enough for rent, not enough for groceries, not enough for anything. The irony was suffocating. I had lost my job for giving away a meal. And now I was worried about how I was going to afford my own dock by Monday morning. I had worked myself into a state of numb resignation. I had to go back to the diner one last time to pick up my paycheck. The thought of facing Mr. Davies again made my stomach churn, but I needed that money. It was all I had. I waited until after the lunch rush, hoping the diner would be quieter. I pushed open the door, and the jingle of the bell sent a shiver down my spine. It didn't feel like my sound anymore. A few customers were scattered around. And Janine, the other waitress, gave me a sad, sympathetic look from behind the counter. Mr. Davies was in his office. I steeled myself and walked over, knocking softly on the door. "It's Clara," I said. "I'm here for my check." He opened the door, a check already in his hand. He didn't look at me.
"Here," he said, thrusting it at me. I took it, my fingers brushing his. The check felt flimsy, insignificant.
I turned to leave, wanting nothing more than to get out of that place forever. And then the bell jangled. It was a different kind of entrance. The door opened and 4 men walked in. They didn't shuffle or amble. They moved with a purpose and a unity that instantly commanded the attention of the entire diner. The low hum of conversation died away. They were Marines. You could tell even if they weren't in uniform, but they were. They wore their immaculate dress blue uniforms, the dark blue coat, the white trousers, the gleaming brass buttons, the white peaked cap. They looked like they had stepped out of a recruitment poster, but there was nothing glossy or fake about them. They were solid, real, and they carried an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. They stood for a moment just inside the door, their eyes scanning the room. One of them, a sergeant with sharp, intelligent eyes and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, stepped forward. The other 3 stood behind him, at ease but alert, a silent wall of support. "We're looking for a waitress named Clara," the sergeant said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence of the diner, clear and firm. Every head in the room turned to me. I froze, my hand still clutching my final paycheck. What could they possibly want with me? My mind raced. Had I done something wrong? Was the old man in some kind of trouble? Mr. Davies stepped out of his office, a look of bewilderment on his face. She doesn't work here anymore, he said, his usual bluster completely gone. He looked small and insignificant next to these men. The sergeant's gaze found me. It wasn't an accusing look. It was steady and searching. "Are you Clara?"
He asked. I could only nod, my throat suddenly too tight to speak. He walked toward me.
The other 3 Marines following in perfect step. They stopped a few feet away. The sergeant took off his cap, holding it respectfully in his hands. "Ma'am," he began, "we've come here today because of Corporal John Harrison." The name meant nothing to me. I don't know who that is, I managed to say. "He's an old man," the sergeant explained, his voice softening slightly. "Wears a faded green jacket. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a Marine. He came to see us yesterday." My heart skipped a beat. The old man. His name was John Harrison. "Is he okay?" I asked, a fresh wave of worry washing over me.
"He's okay, ma'am. He's more than okay. Thanks to you," the sergeant said.
He didn't come to us to complain. He's too proud for that. He came to us because he was ashamed. He told us that a young woman in this diner had showed him a kindness he hadn't seen in years, that she'd given him a hot meal when he was at his lowest point. He said he couldn't bear the thought of not being able to thank you properly, or to pay you back. He told us he didn't have any money, but he had us. He had his brothers. The sergeant looked around the silent diner, his gaze finally resting on Mr. Davies, who was trying to shrink back into his office doorway. "The Marine Corps has a code, sir," the sergeant said, his voice now like steel. "Semper Fidelis. It means always faithful. We are faithful to our country, to our corps, and to each other. We don't leave our own behind, ever. That includes the ones who fought 60 years ago. And it includes the civilians who show them the honor and respect they deserve." He took a step toward me again. "Corporal Harrison couldn't pay you for that meal, ma'am. So we've come to do it for him." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He held it out to me. I stared at the money, then back at his face. "No," I whispered. I can't take that. I didn't do it for money. We know, he said with a small, understanding smile. That's why you deserve it, please. It would be an honor for us if you'd accept it. Slowly, my hand trembling, I reached out and took the bill. It felt heavy with a significance that had nothing to do with its monetary value. But they weren't done. The sergeant turned his attention fully to Mr. Davies. We were also told, he said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register, that this young lady was fired for her act of kindness. Mr. Davies swallowed hard. The color had drained from his face. She broke a company rule, he stammered. I have a business to run, inventory, costs. The sergeant took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The other 3 Marines fanned out slightly, a subtle, intimidating movement. They didn't say a word, but their presence was overwhelming. The whole diner felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. A rule, the sergeant repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Let me tell you about rules, sir. We live by rules that can mean the difference between life and death. But we also live by a creed, honor, courage, commitment. What this young woman showed was all 3. She showed the honor of recognizing a man in need. She showed the courage to do what was right, not what was easy. And she showed a commitment to simple human decency.
He paused, letting his words hang in the air.
You're right. You run a business. But this diner is also in a community. You serve people. And you had a person on your staff who understood that better than you do. You had a person who embodies the kind of character we fight to protect. And you threw her out. Over the cost of a hamburger. Mr. Davies looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He looked at me, at the Marines, at the other customers who were all watching him with expressions of open disapproval. He was being judged not by a boss or a corporate superior, but by a moral standard he had failed to meet, and the weight of it was crushing him. Now, the sergeant said, his tone shifting back to business, we're hungry. We'd like 4 of your best cheeseburger deluxe plates. And a cup of coffee for our friend Clara. We'll be sitting in that corner booth. He pointed to the booth with the ripped vinyl, John Harrison's booth. And when you bring the check, add the cost of the meal that Corporal Harrison ate on Saturday. We're covering his tab. He then looked back at me.
Clara, he said, his voice warm again. Would you do us the honor of sitting with us?
I was so overwhelmed I could barely think. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. I followed the 4 towering figures in their dress blues to the corner booth. One of them slid over to make room for me. I sat down, clutching the $100 bill and my final paycheck in my hands. Mr. Davies, looking shaken and pale, scurried into the kitchen. I could hear him yelling, but it wasn't his usual angry yelling. It was panicked. Sal! 4 deluxe burgers, on the double, the best you've ever made. The sergeant, whose name I learned was Miller, introduced me to the others, Corporal Davis, Lance Corporal Chun, and Private First Class Rodriguez. They were also younger than me, but they had an old-world gravity about them. They treated me with a gentle, profound respect that made me want to weep. They asked me about my life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was actually listening. The food came out, delivered by a trembling Mr. Davies himself. The burgers were perfect. The fries were golden. He set a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. Clara, he said, his voice raspy. You wouldn't look at the Marines, only at me. I was wrong. What I did was inexcusable. Your job is here for you, if you'll have it back. With a raise, a significant one. I looked at Sergeant Miller. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was my choice. And another thing, Mr. Davies added, speaking quickly. From now on, we're going to have a new house rule, a meal for anyone who's hungry and can't pay. We'll call it the Veteran Special, no questions asked. I looked at this man who had been so small and petty just an hour ago, and I saw something different. I saw a man who had been profoundly and publicly shamed, and who was now trying in his own clumsy way to be better. I accept, I said quietly. Thank you. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding all day and practically fled back to the safety of his office. We ate our lunch. The Marines talked and joked, and they included me in their easy camaraderie. They told me about John Harrison, how he'd been living on the streets for a while, too proud to go to the VA or ask for help. But my small act had broken through his wall of solitude. It had reminded him that people could be good, and it gave him the courage to seek out his old brotherhood. The local Marine detachment was getting him a room, some new clothes, and helping him file the paperwork for the benefits he was entitled to. When they were finished, Sergeant Miller called for the check. He paid the bill, and on the tip line, he wrote a number that made my jaw drop. $500. That's from the whole platoon, he said, pushing the receipt toward me. For you, for whatever you need, maybe for some new paints. My breath caught in my throat. He'd remembered. I'd mentioned my old dream of painting, and he had actually listened. They stood up to leave. They put on their caps, their movements crisp and synchronized. The entire diner had been watching us, and as the Marines walked to the door, a customer started to clap. Then another. Soon, the whole diner was filled with applause. Sergeant Miller turned to me one last time. Thank you for looking after our brother, Clara, he said. The world needs more people like you. And with that, they walked out. The bell jangled and they were gone, leaving behind a stunned silence, the scent of cheeseburgers, and a life that was completely and utterly changed. I stayed in that booth for a long time, just looking at the $100 bill, the massive tip, my new paycheck, and my job offer. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the feeling. The cold, hollow place inside me was filled with a brilliant, roaring warmth. The next day, I went back to work at the corner booth diner. Mr. Davies was a different man. He was quiet, more thoughtful. He had put a small handwritten sign up by the register, "Ask about our Veteran Special." A few days later, the bell on the door jangled, and John Harrison walked in. He was wearing new clothes, a warm coat, clean jeans, sturdy boots. He looked 10 years younger. He walked right up to me, his clear blue eyes shining. "I believe this is my booth," he said, a real smile spreading across his face. I smiled back, my own eyes filling with tears. "It is," I said. "The special is on the house." He became a regular, our regular. He never ordered off the menu. He just had the special, and he'd sit and tell me stories about his life, about the places he'd seen, about the brothers he'd found again. I took the money the Marines gave me, and I bought a new set of canvases and paints. At night, after my shift, I started to paint again. I painted the diner, the faces of the regulars, the determined look in a young sergeant's eyes. My life still wasn't the one I'd dreamed of as a girl. It was something else entirely. It was messier, harder, and more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. All because of one hungry veteran and 4 good men who reminded a tired waitress and a whole little diner what it truly means to be faithful.